Good morning and thank you for joining us this morning for our City Council budget development meeting. We'll go ahead and get started. Connie, could you please call the roll?
Adamson.
Here.
Bray.
Here.
Cheatham.
Here.
Lurick.
Here.
Ortega.
Yes.
Stevens.
Here.
Glad.
Here. Thank you. Agenda item number 2 is full-time employee counts and comparisons. Human Resources staff will give an overview of full-time staffing levels and comparisons related to other municipalities.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Heather Buchanan, Human Resources Director. In 5 years, this might be the hardest presentation I've given because there's a difference between accurate and precise. I prefer to be on the precise end of things, and what I'm giving you is accurate. So there is a margin of fluctuation in the numbers, and I'll explain how that happens once we get into the city head count. So I made some bullet points of things oh, by the way, this screen is now up because Jim and I sat in those 2 chairs over there and realized how bad your view is, and we're like, put it up. So everyone gets this screen today. So HR has compared 5 municipalities that HR decided are comps. Some cities provided the data in the actual formats that you're looking at. Other cities provided me FTE lists, and then I took their employee lists and further broke it down by job function based on title. I did not comp to anything that is not a municipality. ISU, ISP, Bannock County. They all have different funding mechanisms, and they have different overall responsibilities than we have. These are like us. Fiscal year 2021 is the year we're using. And Chubbuck and Idaho Falls were the 2 entities, which ironically are the 2 closest to us, so you're probably most interested in their data. They filled out the chart as it is. Caldwell was not able to provide me fiscal year 21 data, so I used their 20 data and rolled it over. So that information is a year out of date. So to define comps, I took any city that had a population within a 10,000 head count of the city of Pocatello or shared a physical boundary. I used the census estimates from 2019. I've provided you a chart of the top 16 in Idaho. Boise, Meridian, and Nampa, not comps. And then it goes Idaho Falls, Caldwell, us, Coeur d'Alene, Twin, and then you drop down to number 16 for Chubbuck. Just so you can kind of see, Idaho is still mostly rural. If you look at Boise down to Chubbuck, we're not even half the pie, and those are your biggest cities by far. So when we talk about comp cities, our numbers are limited just because of how populations demographics roll out. This is just basic census data pulled directly from their website, no editing, so that you have information on Idaho, Boise, Meridian, and Nampa, and then the cities that we're actually looking at. I know this council tends to really like data, so here's information I'm not going to walk through, but I did want it at your disposal because I did go through it.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't on their website, but it seems as though road miles might be important.
It's on there somewhere.
Is it?
There's land area in square miles. I don't know if road is on there.
Yeah, but in terms of, streets in particular, but also sewer and other things, road miles.
I don't know if those are census gathered items.
No, they probably aren't. I say that may be why they're not on here, but it seems as though it's an important data point.
It is, and the departments that are experts over these areas could probably give you those data points.
Okay.
So I threw in some county information simply for the fact that when we talk about legislation, often we talk about it in county increments. For example, the great state of Ada is a commonly said thing. Of the 6 cities that we're looking at, 2 are in Bannock County, the rest are individual within their counties. As you can see, Ada is huge compared to the rest of us. Bannock has us and Chubbuck, and then the ones in red are the other cities, counties that we're looking at. This is a county breakdown. Ada does hit 25% of the state. That's pretty impressive. And then you have Canyon, Kootenai, Bonneville, Bannock, and Twin Falls. So now getting into the comparisons, so an FTE is a full-time employee. That means that's a person budgeted at a full-time rate. So This was hard data to get accurate. A couple of the cities I talked to were fatigued because they've had a lot of records requests for information. So they worked with me the best that they could. As you can see, airport is the first example we come to. Pocatello, Idaho Falls, and Twin Falls all have similar airports. Caldwell has 2, that's a general aviation airport, so they don't have commercial flights. Some discrepancies like these are very easy to explain. That is an easy one. Ambulance service. Pocatello and Idaho Falls hold the ambulance service contract. The other 4 cities listed here do not. Chubbuck, our ambulance district covers because they're part of the county. Animal services, Pocatello and Idaho Falls have full service animal services departments. The others have animal control officers that are usually housed through their police departments, and they donate money to humane societies to run their shelters in their areas. So just letting you peruse, because a lot of this is just data you've asked for. Not everything has an exact match, but a key thing to understand is Idaho Falls has an electric utility, which is 79 people. That's a huge population that we don't have here at the city. We do have a transit department, which is a pretty big department for us. It's not a police or fire. But some of these you have to look at actual departments being offered. Idaho Falls does run their golf courses, so they do have headcount on staff for that. So I always struggle with our engineering department specifically, trying to figure out how to count our engineers. If you look at funding, water is paying 75% of 1 engineer and 2 engineering techs, and WPC is paying 25%, but they report through engineering. So I put them in engineering, but when you look at budget numbers, you're not going to see them on the engineering lines, which is where the accurate is not precise. I would have to break it down by account lines, and I wasn't ready to break it down that way, and I didn't know if council would be ready to look at it that way, because that is a change. So for the services we provide, the City of Pocatello's FTE for fiscal year 21 is comparable with other cities that I've selected based on population counts. There are discrepancies. You have to look at individual departments and overall services that we offer. If you have specific questions about certain departments, I would recommend we talk to the department heads, because I can give you a very condensed version of why there's a difference, but they can articulate it much better than I can. Now, moving into Pocatello historical FTE, this is something Claudia had asked for. I think parts of council have seen numbers like this before. So this is where I noted the engineering's a challenge. FTE is currently being adjusted for previous years. The problem that we found is when we pulled the salary projection report, it lists you in the department that is the first one that's on, that you're charged to their account line. So if I'm charged 10% to water and 90% to HR, I'm going to show up in water simply because it was listed first. So we've tried to correct a lot of those. One area that is a challenge is, sorry, Tom, it's Tom's areas because we have partial splits of 50-50. So that's 4 employees that I have to kind of manipulate between the 2 departments so they don't all show up in the street department, because that overinflates that number. The same thing with Justin. His numbers look high because we have 3 engineers listed in there. So I started with 16. I can tell you fiscal year 22 is reconciled to the salary projection file, which took hours, but these numbers do match where they are primarily listed in the budget. As you can see, we've been pretty steady with most of our departments with very little growth. Economic development did have the 3-year window. If there's blank, that means the department didn't exist. For the most part, growth has been primarily in our emergency services departments. You will see a couple of, 1 year with some pretty big shifts. That was creation of fleet. So that doesn't mean that we lost headcount. It was just reallocated to a different department.
On economic development, we counted even though it was never filled.
Because it was an FTE that year, that's correct.
So, so the numbers for current, are all those actual bodies,
Those are
actual
funded,
humans?
funded positions.
Okay, so how many of those are not human?
You mean vacant?
Yes, not people.
I don't know off the top of my head right now. I can tell you departments that are having trouble searches or they're in searches. I don't think there are any positions at the city that are currently dormant, which means they're not being searched for. Everything either has a timeline or is in process.
So, were you looking at me? I couldn't tell.
I can't.
I couldn't
Yes,
feel
it's
you.
all you.
I thought you were looking at me, that's why I looked at you.
Stop
Well, you
looking
could
at each
feel my
other.
eyes. Yeah. So, we in finance are working on an answer to your question, which is, of those positions that have been budgeted and appointed, how many of them have actually been filled throughout the whole year? And I don't see Chris Sorensen here from IT. So the empty chair syndrome applies. We have a system that allows us to be able to get current information, but to go back historically is difficult. I think I have found a way to do that, but I don't have it quite ready yet. I'm planning on incorporating that into the budget slides that you're going to get for each department. So it'll show this information that Heather is presenting today as it relates to appointed positions. And she's gone back and meticulously determined all of the appointed positions going back 5 years. The tougher challenge is to do what you're asking to do, but we're up to the challenge. We just haven't quite gotten there yet. And I don't have an overall stat yet to tell you what that is, but essentially it's going back and analyzing each and every pay period for the last 26 pay periods a year
Right.
times 5. And you have to determine whether that position was open or not, and there's a calculation that's done. Getting close, but not quite there yet. So,
Chris?
Yeah. So Pocatello has, I didn't know we had a purchase and procurement person who that's the only thing they did.
We have a person in fleet. I separated it out because other cities specifically have procurement areas. We have one housed in fleet. Because it is a procurement type position, we did try to compare it to the like type of position.
Oh, okay, but it's actually part of,
It's fleet procurement.
Okay. And then, so, am I correct in thinking that we have 9 people in engineering who are clearly identifiable as whole people who do engineering? And then the other 5 that we have to get to 14 are the bits and pieces that you're talking about?
So we have 9 people currently funded through engineering. We have 3 that are funded by water and WPC, and then science and environment is rolled into the engineering numbers. So
Okay.
there's 3, 1 engineer,
Right.
2 techs, and science and environment.
Okay, okay.
where is the liability insurance person? Where is that?
It was housed in legal, it's now housed in HR. It was Kirk Bybee's position.
So is Kirk still with us?
He's retiring.
Okay.
Kirk is retiring on June 1.
So if that part of his job or whatever has moved to HR, then I'm assuming we're not going to replace a full FTE?
So we converted, so Ann Butler in Human Resources does workers' comp, which is a big piece of risk management. Her FTE is going from human resources to liability risk. And then HR's open FTE will convert over to legal. So one general fund position moved to another general fund position and liability to switch departments.
Right, but salary-wise, or will they be, I mean, well, wouldn't, my assumption is that an attorney would be paid more.
They are, but they are at a lower pay grade than what Kirk was. The new attorney will be. Jared's
Should be close to a wash when it's.
I guess I'm confused where an attorney that had a certain portfolio is retiring, and we're assuming that we have to have somebody in legal even though they're not going to carry that portfolio.
So Kirk did more than just risk management. He did our civil work. Jared's taken the opportunity to reorganize legal so that all three attorneys do civil and criminal. So it's not just a burden on one person to have an area so you don't have coverage. And we all know the courts are very backed up with COVID, so it will be very nice to have three attorneys that can help with prosecution.
So what I'm concerned that, because at least my impression was that there used to be like an open position in legal.
There's been an administrative position we had not filled that is currently being searched for right now.
So, since we don't know yet exactly what the legislature is going to do, and they've been a little odd this year, I would really like to see us do a hiring freeze until we know how the land lies here, because I understand that when you're hunting for somebody and you've been hunting for somebody and you find somebody, you want to hire them. But by the same token, until we sort through some of this kind of information and stuff, and we know what the legislature's doing, I would really like to see us do a hiring freeze. I agree. Now, I guess the one exception that at least leaps to mind is I can imagine that parks might be trying to hire, their part-time summer people. And I wouldn't want to put them in a bind that way. But for other positions that we apparently have been managing to run the city without, I would like to see all of those frozen until we get this sorted out.
So what we would need to do is find out how many are not human in these positions.
Well, just to give you a quick rundown of what that looks like.
And well, the issue is I can think of two positions that have been funded that have not been filled. One of them was back in, 2 years ago with the economic development person. The other is they've been trying to find somebody for legal, and that paralegal position has not been. But other than that, every other position I think in the city has been filled, and you've had a retirement or somebody resign in that position. And so to go back to what Jim was saying, 26 times 5 to figure out how many people were there for every pay period, to me is...
I'm not asking.
Well, I know that, I understand that, but what I'm saying is if we're looking at it and saying who is here, who isn't here, what is a human, what isn't a human, I think that you can narrow that down to, quite frankly, very few. And then with the hiring freeze also, when it comes to fire and police, when we have a fire or a police officer resign or retire, we don't have much of a choice. You've got to hire them.
So basically you're saying, no, we're not going to do anything remotely resembling trying to freeze hiring. We're just going to proceed as usual regardless.
There's a number of employees that are difficult. It is not easy to find qualified employees right now.
I understand that.
And so I think that there's a lot more savings in the positions that have been resigned than people realize, or I think there's some that we don't realize, because we can't find people. We're in the process right now of working on a hiring fair just to get people to look and apply at the
Right.
city. So-
Understood.
So I think that's difficult to say, don't hire anybody.
So basically you're saying, no, we will not do anything in terms of curtailing hiring at this point. Is that a correct summary?
No, I don't think so. I think you need to continue to try to find somebody. We're not just going to hire somebody because they have a hard.
No, that's what I'm saying. You are saying we are going to continue, and we will make no effort
That's absolutely incorrect.
to freeze hiring in any situation. I'm just trying to get a very clear.
No, and I can appreciate that, but that is 100% incorrect. We
Okay.
will continue to try to hire qualified people,
I understand that.
and that's what we intend on
You
doing.
guys are on two different pages.
Yeah, you're not.
Well, we
you're
must
not-
be on two different.
So I wanna
Maybe
know-
Council
no.
President Adamson can
Yeah.
get us on the same page.
When I came on the council previous to me had asked for a similar request. And the concern that was raised was that sometimes you have positions that maybe they wanted to eliminate through attrition, but sometimes you have truly essential things that you've got to get, like you indicated, you got to have somebody go mow the lawn
I
in the parks or else we're
understand.
in trouble, right? So when I was first on the council, the mayor would send us out an email that would say, okay, I know we're not just hiring for the fun of it, but here's a position that is pretty essential, here's the reason for it. And I can't think of a single one, maybe Councilmember Bray can think of it, but whenever he would email us and say, here's one that we've got to put out there that HR's got a list, we were all like, yeah, we pretty much have to. So I guess the situation I'm thinking of right now is with Kirk, how many times have we just seen in the council his name on documents, reviewed and approved by Bidey? So if he's leaving, they've got to have somebody to help with that. They can't just make everybody else in that department who's already,
Right.
fully working and spending their time. So that's, I guess, maybe the concern or the thought is that there are certain ones like this legal one, for example, where it would really put the city in a bind, so.
Understood. So last year, I recall that Jared had a position that had been unfilled for some time when he did his presentation, but it was still listed as a hireable, an open position which could be hired. But we've apparently but he's had it on his request list for several years, last year at this time. So those are the kinds of positions that I really believe we should not be filling now when we don't know how the land lies.
Like you're talking about the administrative one?
Pardon me?
The administrative?
I don't know, it was just listed as an open position in
Okay.
legal. I don't recall if it was defined, perhaps it was, I don't recall. So what I really don't want to see is that as we're going into budgeting, as we're dealing with the fact that we're unclear what the legislature is going to do that may curtail our revenue streams, I don't want those positions that we've been functioning without for 6 months, 3 years, to be filled. I want those kinds of positions frozen.
So I think it's just the one that you're referring to then, right? That's not an actual, a human, right?
So,
It hasn't been
so
filled.
Heather was trying to say something and I cut her off.
The majority of our current open positions are in emergency services. Fire just filled theirs from the budget amendment. Police has 4 open dispatchers, a dispatch supervisor, a records supervisor. Those are civilian. They also have several sworn officer openings. Water has 1 equipment operator. Sanitation has 1 equipment operator.
I mean, we don't...
And finance has 1.
We don't know what the ramifications of bargaining are going to be. I mean, I would much rather not hire somebody than have to hire somebody and then in order to make the budget work, have to then cut people. So I think there's some humane prudence in saying, you know, whenever possible, let's not hire.
I think we do a pretty good job at, whenever possible, not hiring. There's a reason why legal had that position, because as they've looked at it, they've been able to get by. The council 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and last year approved that, knowing that it was a prudent position and something that was probably needed. However, in doing that, they have done everything they can to keep moving the way they are. 2020, up to, was that last week, they started going back to court? I think they've got a backlog of courts and things like that.
About 50,000 across the state, according to legal.
And so it's going to be more and more difficult to hold off on things like that. But we definitely look, and we definitely don't just hire because we have a spot available.
Well, Brian, but that isn't, I'm asking for a yes, no from you.
I have no intention of doing a hiring freeze.
Okay.
Because we
Thank you.
have some positions that we have no choice, you have to hire. But we're very prudent in doing
And I described
stuff.
what kind of position I'm talking about, and so I would like to know, relative to the positions that are not currently in fire, police, or otherwise urgent, are you willing to say that we will hold off until we have a better idea of what bargaining is going to mean and what the legislature, what their activity is going to mean?
I am going to do what we have got to do to continue to provide services to the community the way the community has
So that's
expected.
a no.
So
Thank
you interpret that how you would like to.
It's a no, because it's not a yes.
Linda?
I just wanted to comment too, because I think there's other departments that could become critical. We have projects that are, scheduled for this summer, and we have pending retirements, and how are we going to do that work? I think there's no way to just make it a yes or no, that you can just say, we're going to freeze. I mean, there's going to be positions that come up that we cannot continue to provide the level of service that we need to provide without filling those positions. So I don't see that it's just a yes or no or a one-size-fits-all. I think it has to be a case-by-case basis. As they come up, we have to look. I mean, as you said, you're not just, running out and hiring every time.
We're not doing that.
I didn't make that
We're not looking at each position individually and deciding we want to fill that.
I'm not saying we need to do that. I'm saying that I don't agree with the idea.
I might have misunderstood you.
I didn't say we. I'm talking about the city and Brian, but what I'm talking about is the idea of a freeze, that you just are saying, we're not going to hire positions. I think there are critical positions that when they come up, if somebody retires, we have water projects, for example, this summer. If they're looking at retirement in their department, then those positions are going to be critical. Police and fire, we've already mentioned, and those are kind of obvious, but there might well be others. So the idea of just saying, a blanket yes or no, I don't think it's that simple.
And you're speaking to something that I didn't ask. Because
I'm just
wasn't
speaking
asking-
to my concern about the idea of a freeze.
And what I defined the kinds of positions. I didn't ask for a across-the-board categorical. So I appreciate your perspective, but that's not what I'm asking, and I just want to be clear for the record that I don't want to be misunderstood. I said positions that are not critical. And it may be, for example, that having the grass at 3 inches rather than 2 inches is not critical. And so perhaps there are positions that we could avoid hiring at this point in time, anticipating the potential for a very large, first of all, an increase in health
Perhaps
costs,
there
and
are.
a very potential for a very large salary increase, plus the potential for a more restricted revenue stream.
I'm just responding to the word freeze.
Jim?
And that, what you're saying there isn't a freeze.
No, it's changed from a freeze to something else. But Jim, you had something.
Yeah, when I first started here and we had our first budget discussion, I said I wear the referee stripes at times. And I'm going to do that a little bit right now and offer a suggestion to the city council and the mayor within that framework. And, you know, I do look like I'm 100 years old, but I'm not quite that old. So I've been around the block a few times and in other agencies that experience hard times financially, and usually one of the first things that occurs is a desire to reduce the largest item that's in our budget, which is payroll, within the context of doing a hiring limitation, if maybe that's the better word to use. The way I've seen it done in other jurisdictions, and there's nothing particularly magic about it, but if we have a list of those positions that are open from attrition versus open from they've never been filled, I think we could identify all of the positions that are in both of those categories and have recommendations come from the mayor's office, which would include those that appear to be crucial in accomplishing what the city council's mission is, and the mayor's mission, and staff that's been hired to help accomplish that mission. That's the way I've seen it done in other jurisdictions. And I'll just tell you from a very practical perspective. So I've had a position in my department, the deputy finance director, that's been unfilled for some time. We're having a very difficult time filling the position, which goes to the point that the mayor mentioned earlier. But I believe that's crucial to not just my department, but to the operations of this city. And my recommendation would be to not allow that position to go unfilled. I think it needs to be filled. But within the context of maybe what the city council would like to see, maybe you'd like to have the opportunity to get recommendations from the mayor's office within that context. I don't think the list would be terribly difficult to provide, but the mayor does have the administrative hat to wear for the city, and he's the one that makes the decisions, but it certainly could be done within the context of giving you the opportunity to at least say, we don't think that that's a position that needs to be filled right now, or
Well,
not.
and because neither he nor us can operate in a silo. He can make those decisions, but we have to figure out the budgeting. So it can't just be him deciding, this is what I want, and us deciding, yes, we're, or this is the, if we don't come up to a collaborative, everybody has to be involved. We have to set the budget. That's our primary job, is setting the budget. And we can't do that if we have absolutely no say in how many people are going to be replaced. But you know what I did like is your recommendation as the head of your department. I'm sorry, I wasn't pointing to be mean.
That's okay. You can
No,
point.
that your recommendation as the head of your department, that position is critical. I would like to hear, as these positions are, obviously, if people are retiring, then the department heads know that retirements are imminent. Then, if Tom's got people retiring, then Tom can come and say, I've got 3 people retiring, 2 of them are crucial, 1 of them we can absorb. And then we can do that. And then we can have some semblance of budgetary control, because otherwise, I just don't know how we're going to come up with a budget when we're going to have very little data from the, from the state.
So Mayor, if I could, in response to what Claudia is saying, in my experience in that state over on the West Coast that starts with C, and I won't mention whose name that is, I had 2 different organizations that I worked for over the course of the last 15 years, a little bit longer than that, but one of them was not doing very well financially. The other was doing very well financially. The one that wasn't doing too well financially, the last year that I was there, came up against a particularly difficult financial challenge. And what they did, and this is what as we get into the rest of this discussion related to the budget, I'm going to go through some overall strategies that you might want to consider within the context of how the budget might get balanced. But one of the things that the less well-to-do organization did was to actually take into account what they knew was going to be the case in the way of vacancies throughout the year. So they put a budget line item into their budget, not very precise, somewhat accurate, that allowed for vacancies that might occur during the year, and it could be ratcheted up or down depending upon what the city's how it wanted to approach that. But it also did a hiring freeze, but had that list that I was talking about that dealt with this is all of the positions that we have. If we fill this position, it's going to impact our budget in this fashion. And what is the impact as it relates to how it's going to impact operations if you don't fill the position? It worked out. It helped us to be able to balance that budget. So as I say, maybe when we get into that, we can talk a little bit more. And I keep pointing to this. I've got a little handout that I'll give to you that might help in that respect.
And Mr. Mayor, I want to address the comment that you made, which was very accurate, and I think it deserves to be highlighted, which you said, I went from the word freeze to a less across the board suggestion. And that's true. And that is because I am willing to listen, and I'm willing to hear, and I'm willing to amend my thinking based on information that is relevant and important. And so I want to make sure that the fact that I started using one word and shifted is not anything other than a demonstration of the fact that I am willing to be trained up, and I am willing to publicly say, okay, based on information or perspective that I didn't previously have, I'm willing to think differently. I just want to make that clear. One of my concerns is that if you take, just as a sort of a benchmark way of looking at FTE, if you take the 23 most common departments across our comps, Pocatello has 496, give or take, FTE, not counting part-time. Caldwell has 284. And there are reasons for this. I'm not saying there aren't reasons, but I'm saying we have a significant number of employees. Coeur d'Alene has 366. Idaho Falls, has 518, but you have to pull out the 79 that are related to hydroelectric. Twin has 309. So we're leading the pack, and it may not be that we have structured our city in the most effective way. And I hate to see us just continue down the same personnel path when we haven't looked at our operational infrastructure and our processes, because something causes us to be at 496.5, and I'm not sure what special services Pocatellans get that folks in these other communities don't get, that causes us to be so high. And in addition, I would like a comparable list for our part-time people, because we have more employees than this. Based on one of your recent newsletters, I believe you said 722 employees. And so, you know, rounding up 496.5 to 500, that leaves another 222 employees that must be a variety of part-timers. And that's important. 222 employees part-time or otherwise cost money. And so I would like to see a list of who those people are, so that we can better understand our personnel situation.
Okay, Heather?
A more accurate way of looking at seasonal and variable hour employees is to look at the budget line. Because if I have $10,000 and I hire 10,000 people and they work 1 hour, it's the same expenditure as one person that works for the 10,000. So what you'd need to compare is the variable hour and seasonal budgets between the entities.
Great. I would like that, please. I think it would be very helpful.
I don't have access to that. That would have to come from Jim, and I'm not sure either of us right now have a huge bandwidth with 2 negotiations and budgeting going on.
Is that something that departments could individually tell us, and then we could create a compiled, you know?
I'm sorry, this has been a really hard presentation. If you could please let me finish the sentence before you talk over the top of me.
Okay.
Yes, that is something departments can compile. One key thing to understand is ambulance's budget is very tricky, because what we have are called ambulance volunteers. They're on a stipend for response, and then they're paid for response. So Dave's going to have to provide you a number that is a little bit different than every other department. We can get it together. If you can give us a time frame, we will compile it and have it presented at the next budget meeting, if that's the direction we're given.
Well, we're talking about an awful lot of stuff, and I don't know if the council needs to have this immediately or not. If the a majority of the council needs to be interested in having this information probably before I have all the department heads try to chase that down, because as you know, as Paige knows, to call 5 different communities that we're trying to compare to and try to get all of the part-times and full-times takes a little bit more than picking up the phone and saying, hey, how many part-times do you have? And what are they? And so I've got to look at what kind of bandwidth we have with 2 union negotiations, following the legislature, and I think that's a very good point. We don't know what these guys are going to do, because they're crazy over there. They're absolutely anti-city, anti-growth, anti-development. They're anti-everything that we fight for every day. So we've got to follow that. Plus, we've got a budget to put together. And plus, we've got our departments and everybody's department to continue to run. And so every time we put another thing like this on top of them to get done in a few weeks is difficult at best. And so what kind of time frame are we looking at? I mean, what kind of time frame are we?
How about we start simple and just say for Pocatello, could we have a list of our various kinds of part-time positions?
Yes.
And
That's something that they have.
Start simple.
Yes, okay. For our next budget meeting. Sure.
I don't,
One of them.
whenever it can happen, but before
we
we
will-
are making final budget decisions.
Okay.
But I don't have.
I can, absolutely, we can do that. When we're starting to, the comparison thing is where I start to get concerned and worried that we don't have the time. So we can get that pulled together, and what we'll do is I'll have them pull that together. If we can get it done sooner than later, we'll just get it emailed out to the council. No?
It needs to be presented.
We'll present it, that's right, it does need to be presented at a meeting.
You're
So we'll
welcome,
get it-
Jared.
We'll get it presented as quickly as we can, yes. Roger.
I want to take us in a completely different track for a second. I want to use the data and I want to call out information. It's on slide number 9, and there's no title to it, but the top of it says transportation on the far left. I want to go down to income and poverty thing. I think that it's important when we're going to be comparing Pocatello to all these other places that we understand that we have the lowest median income, we have the second lowest per capita income, and that we have the highest poverty rate. All of those people at some place that are taxpayers, and they deserve as much consideration at this table as anybody else. And I just wanted to lift them up because that's what the census data tells us. And when we go one way, we're walking away from this group perhaps. So I just want to put that out there, that the data here shows those three things.
Okay, anything else? Linda?
I just would comment on that idea that the primary mission of the city, the thing that we do is provide service. And I think that the people that you're talking about are actually the main users of most of the services that we provide. And so I think, that I agree with you, that's something that we have to keep in mind, but I also think that makes it even more important that we keep our service levels up, because those are the people that need those services.
I agree to a point that they do require services, but we provide a lot of services that they don't access. Very few of them fly, and they're in a poverty level, 18.5%. Very few of them have multiple cars. Some of them don't have any cars. They get around by other means.
But they get around by transportation a lot of the time. They're often the ones that
The street department
use
does
the
not,
police service, the
does not
fire
service
service.
them like it does other people that own multiple vehicles.
I think that we will continue to keep them in mind, like we have in the past. We'll continue to do what we can to help improve and increase their ability to have disposable income and do the things that they need to do and stuff. By all means, that is not a group of people that has ever been left out of the budget.
Yeah, but we get fast to who we hire and what work we do and all that. We forget that there's a number of people
Absolutely.
who have nothing
Sure.
to do with having a voice, really.
So, okay, Heidi?
I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you to Heather. I know that this has been a big project and has taken you a ton of time, and so I just wanted to let you know how much we appreciate it. It's really good for us to have this information and to be able to look over it and review it, so thank you.
I'm happy to provide something that helps.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Then I've got to get back to the thing. Thank you, Heather. Yeah, Chris?
Relative to Roger's comment, I think the other thing we have to think about when you look at poverty level, it means that every dollar is a bigger bite out of that household budget. So it's not just that a dollar is a dollar. A dollar to me is very different than a dollar to somebody who makes $24,000 a year. So I think it's not as simple as simply saying, well, those people use the services. Because depending on what we do with our portion of what results in property taxes can actually increase our homeless rate. It can increase the stress on families. And when you increase the stress on families, along with that goes increased crime rate. So it's not as simple. Poverty and our poverty rate has tentacles into everything else that we do and the services that we provide. So I think, and I've said this before and I'm going to put it out there again, I have a very active interest in reducing the city budget by the general fund, the property tax ask by $1 million this year. I have that as a very active goal. And I realize it's a goal.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Then with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 3 is the fiscal year 2022 budget development overview. Finance staff will give an overview of budget development items related to creation of the city's fiscal year 2022 budget.
So I have, I assumed that the mayor was talking to me when he said to do that next item. So I have a couple of housekeeping items just to kind of keep everybody, is that up on the screen now?
It is.
Okay. One of the disadvantages of not having a screen over here is I can't tell what's on the screen right now, but I'll do the best I can. So housekeeping items. I sent you out service level reports. It's a draft, meaning there are a couple of things that are probably going to change in there. I was informed last night that there were definitely a couple of things that needed to change. Nothing major within that context, but we had neglected to get the updated library service level report. So what's in this document is the old library service levels. As it ends up, I'm not saying that the library is unimportant, it just, there was a miscommunication there. So we will get that updated. There's not a lot to update in the library's case, but we'll get that updated. And then in the airport area, again, my eyesight isn't what it used to be, but I misrepresented a number that was supposed to be a 6 instead of an 8. The airport fund is fund number 6. I saw it as fund number 8. Didn't affect the numbers, but it does affect how I labeled that, so that'll get changed as well. The numbers are still going to be the same. So if you need a hard copy, I've got more than enough over here stacked up, and I'd prefer to not recycle any one of those. So please feel free to take one of these hard copies. But wait, there's more. We have a special on service level reports.
Roger, do you want one?
For a slight shipping and handling fee,
Yes.
you can get 2 of these. 2 of these for $19.99.
The advertisement will cease at this moment. No more advertising. And then the budget calendar, I sent that out to the city council during the week. I got a little too exuberant with the yellow highlighter. The yellow highlighting is supposed to be done to help people understand the importance. If I had highlighted it in red, it might have been a little bit better. But I wanted to highlight the item that's at the bottom of the first page, towards the bottom of the first page. And it says Thursday, May 20th, 2021. Questions, comments, and guidance from City Council due to Finance Department from City Council. Department budget presentation slides to be provided to the City Council. I wanted to highlight that, but I am not asking that you meet on that day. And I was already informed that I had made a mistake there. I did not intend to do anything else other than to highlight that for purposes of importance.
Thought you spelled that out in a correction to us.
Okay, but I'm
I
not as
did.
smart as I look.
Because I was aware of it.
I need it broken down.
I'm not as old as I look either, but that's the way it goes. So, yes, I just wanted to reemphasize that for those of you out in TV land as well. And that's kind of that part of the housekeeping. I have copies of the budget calendar if you want a hard copy of that as well. I hate to waste paper, so please
You
ask me
have them
for,
already?
right here.
I'll deliver. Gotta earn my keep at the table.
I think you already did.
I think you did.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to talk about today is what I have up on the slide, or up on the projector here. But before I go into that, too much, I don't know why, but somehow I knew that we were going to have an item in the budget that I highlighted in yellow, and it says City Council directive to allow for property tax decreases. And I envisioned, based upon somehow I just determined that it was going to be around $1 million. This is kind of like when you watch some television reality shows and they have magicians on there and they know what you're thinking even before you think it. This was not a trick on my part. I actually understood that there was some desire to have something along the lines of $1 million included as a possibility in how you might want to look at the budget. So you talked about some public policy issues already today. Putting $1 million as a reduction in budget relates to public policy. You have, as was pointed out by Councilmember Bray, you have a large element of the population that is not at the higher end of the income spectrum. And what you do as it relates to your budget determines the type of service that you're going to provide to your citizens. If you take $1 million out of the budget, and if you take the largest components of the budget, which include, there's no secret here, but there's two fairly large components, one of which is the police department, $16,028,890 was the budget for this current year, unrevised, that's not been amended. And then the other component, as you might know, is the fire department. Much as they would hate to admit it, they are below the police department, but bear in mind that some of the fire department is not included in this part of the budget. It's over in another fund, in the ambulance fund. There's another $3.5 million plus that relates to the fire department, but it's funded in a different way. So despite the fact that they're number two, they're not number two by very much. So if you were to take $1 million out of the budget, that would be about, as it's showing up at the top. And Linda, are you seeing that? I've got a handout. Let me send out the handout here too.
Getting your steps in.
She's right there. Wow. I'll let you take.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm happy
would
to
it be
go.
acceptable to give people in the audience a copy of the handout so they can't see that screen?
Do you have, how many copies do you have?
I've got 15 here, so there's plenty. I just won't be able to give one to Tom back there. So, and he doesn't care anyhow because this doesn't have anything to do with his budget. It sort of does, and I'm being a little sarcastic. So the implication here is that if you take $1 million out of the budget, which is about 2.7%, and if you did that allocation as to who would have their budgets cut in order to make up that $1 million, if you did it on a pro rata basis, the largest part of the budget would take the largest hit. That would incorporate a $435,000 reduction in the police department's budget. One of the things I said when I first made a budget presentation here, and it seems like it's been a long time ago, but it was only 2.5 months ago, was as you approach the budget, I think the desire was to make public safety your #1 priority. There's reasons for that, not the least of which is when you have a high poverty rate in your community, you're going to have more demands for public safety. It just goes along with that metric. If you want to provide better service to those that are in that part of the spectrum, of the income spectrum, then you look at the services that are related to what we're doing for those parts of the community. Things like public transportation, big one. Economic development would be another one. Right now, economic development is $110,000 in our budget. That is the awards that you make to community organizations, $110,000 out of the total budget of $36,797,000. But if they're going to bear a portion of that 2.7%, that would be $2,989. Fire department's portion of that would be $244,240. If you were to ask those two
But not
departments.
including
Ambulance.
the ambulance.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason ambulance is not included is it's funded differently. It's actually funded primarily by Bannock County.
Right. But no, but I mean, this number, this 244.
Does not include that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No impact there. If you go up to some of the other departments, mayor and council, $24,847. Finance department, one that I am sort of familiar with, becoming more familiar as time goes on, $25,866. City hall, that's our janitors here, custodial work, $13,589. Building, $20,222. I'll just make a note about the building department. Building provides permitting activities. They're really tied more directly to the fees that they're charging as compared to property taxes. But if you're going to do an across-the-board reconciliation of that $1 million, it would involve reducing building department by $20,000. I won't make any other comment on that. Community development, $22,000. Engineering, $30,000. Human resources, $15,000. All the way down the line. This one's kind of interesting, $34,000 for non-departmental.
Yeah, what's that again? I always have to get reminded which one.
It's transfers, everything,
that's right.
everything that we can't delineate to a specific department, we put in non-departmental. It's kind of an oxymoron. Is it a department or is it not?
Right.
Non-department is sort of like, it's a department that's made up of non or citywide type functions.
And I'm assuming that PRT is not in there because...
That's correct.
Nothing from the general fund goes toward PRT.
Okay, that's a really interesting point because property tax revenues go to PRT. Property tax revenues go to the airport. Property tax revenues go to streets. There is some impact as it relates to citywide within that context, but if you're talking about $1 million in the general fund, that's one way to delineate how that reduction would occur. So the first question is the city council interested in going that route? It's a city council-wide decision, but if you do go that route, as a result of that, and this number, $2,028,722,
Where's that?
It's not on ours.
Oh, okay.
I see that it's a different number over on, we had
We
a,
have 1,860,000.
yeah, 1,800,000. I'm going to put the other number in there and temporarily mess up my formulas, but that's okay. It's neither accurate nor precise right now.
Look at her.
Both are exhausting to get to.
One is a little more exhausting than the other. If you want to be 99.9% precise, there's a big cost to get to that point. So it would result, that number, 1,860,000, is an estimated amount associated with increases in our benefits, which health insurance is the primary benefit. We have contractual obligations associated with when somebody comes to work here, whether they're either a union member, bargaining unit member, or non-bargaining unit member. They have an expectation as to what their step increases would be over time, so that incorporates that as well. It also incorporates another amount, and I can't tell you what that amount is based on because it's partially confidential. So with all of those things in mind and no other adjustments to our budget, our expenditure amount would be, and that incorporates $1 million decrease, $37,658,090. The reason I put that in red is typically you think of expenditures as the red part of your presentation. And then revenues, currently $36,687,779. Items to consider for either increase or decrease would include expected shared revenues. You notice nothing is there, so that's not to say we're going to get nothing in the way of shared revenues. Shared revenues are sales taxes, liquor taxes, all of the elements that get distributed by the state to cities.
This is a grade for the legislature, by the way, 0.
Yes, we're waiting for the legislature to finish their deliberations that they've been so diligently doing for the last 6 months or 5 months or whatever it is. Whether they are done with their deliberations or not, I don't know for sure. But until they are, we do not get any information from the source that we have for that information, which is the Association of Idaho Cities. They will wait until the legislature is done with their session before they give us that information. So we're probably going to have to go with some estimates. My best estimate at this point in time is we've got some fluctuations up and down. Looks like sales tax revenues are probably going to go up a bit. We've got some shared revenues there that are being distributed as a result of a lot of different things happening, not the least of which is COVID. People are buying things differently than the way they used to, so there's not as many bricks and mortar type of establishments that we get sales taxes from. It goes in a different place. And lo and behold, the state has every right to do what they want with that revenue, but they get a little bit larger share of that revenue that comes from on a shared basis through internet sales and things of that nature. Maybe they'll get that resolved in the legislative session. I don't know. But I don't anticipate that we're going to see a decrease in sales taxes. We'll probably see an increase there. We've got some franchise taxes that are probably going to go down a bit. The other revenue sources, at this point, I really don't know, but I think it's probably going to be pretty much a wash on shared revenues. So to some extent, I don't know that it really matters whether I have that information or not. I'm going to just probably say that it's going to be a wash. There'll be some ups and downs, but no change in that source of revenue. So then we get down to property taxes. And what I've done here, and this is all in an effort to, how are we going to fund expenditures of $37,658,090? We're going to fund it with our current revenue plus or minus any changes that we make in the revenues that are available to do that with, or other resources. So the consumer price index change, and this is a very precise number. It's published. It is open to some interpretation, but it is a very, very precise number, about 99.999% accurate. It showed that we had an increase of 1.18%, and that's October to October, from October 2019 to October 2020. That would, if we took 1.18% as our amount of property tax increase, it would be $255,641. What implication would that have to the average property taxpayer? It depends on whether you are above or below what the average growth rate is within assessed value within the city of Pocatello. If your growth rate where you live is higher than what the average growth rate is, you're going to pay more than somebody that has a lower percentage. A 1.18% increase for many property taxpayers would be nothing. There wouldn't be any property tax increase on that basis. They would see a decrease. However, many property tax owners would see an increase even with a 1.18% increase. In addition to the 1.18%, to bring us up to what is allowed, and as far as I know, it still is allowed, the legislature is still doing the final touches on deciding whether there's going to be a change in the allocation of property taxes. It looks like there probably will be, and it'll probably stay similar in many ways to the way it is right now, with some other limitations associated with how much new construction money we can take, and what the thresholds are that we would have to meet before we could increase some of our property tax revenues. But having said all of that, if we went up to the 3%, that would be an additional $394,293 above and beyond the $255,641. So if we go to 3%, it would be the combination of those two amounts, the CPI amount plus that additional 1.82%. I'm fairly confident that new construction is going to be around 200,000. I have not gotten the data yet from the county assessor's office. I've looked at the data that is available through the building department, and it looks like that is very likely that we would have 200,000. One of the limitations that the new legislation would have, I think, is 90% cap on new construction. So even with that 90% cap, I think we'll still have a $200,000 increase from new construction in property taxes. If you took those increases in property tax revenues, that would provide, in addition to all the other revenue sources, $37,717,000 roughly in revenues. And that would put you $59,623 out of balance. Another part of my presentation is I was going to show you where we're at on our expenditures so far this year in relation to what our budget amount is. It looks like we're going to have some savings on the expenditure side. We're probably going to pretty much break even from a revenue perspective. So those savings that we're going to have on expenditures will easily make up for this $59,623. But having said all of that, if we put $1 million in there as a reduction, that still means that we would, in order to balance things out the way I've shown it here, that still means that we would be taking a full 3% of our property taxes in order to balance our budget. If you don't have that $1 million in as a reduction, it makes it even more difficult for us to be able to balance.
Roger?
I was going to ask you to clarify, because what I'm seeing in your illustration here is that you have taken $1 million out, and that only, and still, we're only going to be 59,000 long.
Yes,
Doing that, based
That's
on the
correct.
anticipated stuff.
that's correct.
And if you had your 200,000 that you had in there, that meant we were short, right?
No, actually, I included the 200K in there.
Well, I'm saying you changed this to 1.86.
So the numbers self-balance
Okay.
up here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Linda?
Just looking at this, what it does to our departments. I go back to the idea that what our main business as a city is to provide service, public service. And, we've talked about, impacts of COVID, we've talked about, increased crime, growth. All of those things actually mean increased need for service. And I just question, just looking at police and fire alone, how does the police department operate and provide the service? How do we achieve our mission and our goal of providing the service with, $435,602 cut to that department alone? This is my worry about these kind of across the board type of cuts. Obviously the real challenge here, we want to keep our taxes as low as they can possibly be. We want to be good stewards of our taxpayer money, but we have to balance that with the services that we need to provide. And I just don't see that these kind of cuts to the departments are something that we can manage and then still provide the service that we need to. This is going to be a major hit to service level, and that's our main thing that we do. So this is very concerning.
Claudia, go ahead.
Well, with regard to that, I would rely on the police department to tell us how it would affect their ability to provide service. I wouldn't assume that it would be impossible. And the $1 million is a goal. It's not a hard number. $1 million is a goal, because if we don't have a goal of reduction, then we're not going to reduce. We saw this last year. So the $1 million is a goal, and it's not an across the board. Jim put that up as if every department was contributing, but that's not necessarily the decisions that would be made. So that's an example. But I would rely on the department, the police department, to tell us how that $435,000 would impact their ability to provide service, rather than just make the assumption that it's completely impossible and suddenly we're going to have, 1 million mass shootings in Pocatello because there's $435,000 less.
So I'm going to be a little sarcastic right now. If you ask the police department for that answer, it'll probably take a very short period of time. If you ask the fire department, you might be here for another couple hours. So.
And I just want to clarify, I didn't ever use the word impossible. I said this is concerning to me. Because we're achieving, I didn't. We're trying to achieve a balance of, keeping taxes low and providing service. And so that is a concern. I never use the word impossible, but we need to hear from our
So-
departments.
So I think that what this demonstrates, though, is the challenge that Jim and I are going to have, because we still don't know what the legislature is going to do. We still don't know what's going to happen there. And we're trying to help fast track this so that after you've gone through your service level reports, you can ask the questions that are needed so that we can get a budget presented to you. And I think this is just it is really showing, okay, this is kind of what we're up against. And we're going to do our very best to do everything we can. And I am going to rely extremely heavily on Jim. And we will be discussing things with departments and stuff, but.
So he's been
it's-
relying very heavily on me, and I've lost about half of my hair. I'm 2 inches shorter than I used to be,
That's right.
and I've lost a bunch of weight. And I don't think any one of those things have made a combination that makes me any happier than I was when I first started working
true.
here. But I'm not all about being happy.
But I do think it's important for the council to see what we're up against, and so that when we are in the discussions with you have that opportunity, we'll have definitely the opportunity to discuss things with every department, with the departments. It will be a shortened time frame, but it will hopefully help everybody understand, and I think that I mean, I've got confidence that we can do what we need to do here. But I think this is a good exercise that shows you that we've got some things, some work ahead of us that we've got to get to. And then I've got Roger and then Chris.
Just so I'm wrapping my head around this a little bit, Jim. You're saying that even when we take the maximum property tax, the 3%, no matter how you calculate it, divide it out, that's $650,000 additional dollars that we can put into the budget. Even after we put $650,000 additional dollars into the budget, and after we've taken $1 million out in other areas, we're only going to end up with $59,000 excess.
We'll be out of balance by that amount. And
Negative.
yeah, so, yeah, I mean, that's an amount that we still need to make up within the
Okay, I thought
country.
you said excess.
Well, excess expenditures over revenues,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
But you also commented that it was going to be easily made up by,
Yes.
what was it?
Well, so let me explain that real quickly. I know that Chris was going to talk next. So one of the ways to balance a budget is to take money out of your fund balance. The desire of this council is to have a 25% fund balance in the general fund. That's a number that you don't want to, as you're watching your fund balance decrease, you say, oh, there went the 25%, and then you're below the 25%. Because if it goes by that fast, you're going to have a hard time making up for that downward spiral. It's much easier on the upside, and what I was suggesting is that I believe that so long as departments continue to expend their remaining resources prudently, as they should, I'll say that very loud, as they really should, we will end up with excess money in our fund balance associated with savings on expenditures. So theoretically, if you increase your fund balance this year because you've had some savings, you could utilize that fund balance next year, or that increase in your fund balance next year, bearing in mind you still have a trend that you have to deal with. And that's why I take very seriously things like when there's a suggestion that we reduce our budgets. I know the spirit in which that is to save the taxpayers money, as well as to provide a way for us to true up our revenues in relation to our expenditures. And that part of the truing up needs to take place within that context. Bearing in mind again, the budgets, I know that at the end of fiscal year '20, there was money that was left over in people's budgets. They had some savings. That did not end up necessarily going to the general fund balance. It went into a different fund. And maybe we need to look to that other fund perhaps as another way to help us out with the way we balance our budget. We can reallocate property taxes as well. This is just using the current allocation process that you went through that developed how much goes to the general fund, how much goes to airport, how much goes to parks, how much goes to, a little bit goes to the library. There's a number of different parts of our budget that get some tax money. Streets gets some of the tax money as well. So there's ways to resolve it. I'm just showing you in this scenario, this is how it would work.
And some of those funds are not limited by the 3%.
Well, so we're limited by 3% in total for all of our property taxes. So you could say, that's a really good point. If we took a 3% increase in the general fund and didn't take any increase in the other funds, that would have a diminished impact on how much the property taxpayers were going to be paying within that context. So 3% for the general fund doesn't represent 3% for the total amount of property taxes that we take in throughout the whole city.
Chris?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could get a list of what and I don't know if this is the right term or not, but the department reserves, the money that departments have, because obviously you don't want to use that for personnel because it doesn't help you in the long run, but there might be other expenditures that departments would be requesting that could be funded out of that versus out of the general fund. So I just think, I'm curious to know what those numbers are. And then I'm also curious because I don't have a handle on departmental CARES Act money and whether that's, again, the right term or not, I don't know, but money they got as a result of decisions at the federal level due to COVID. Because, again, not wise to spend that for personnel, but there might be other alleviating impacts. Also, any money in the city coffers from the money that we were allocated due to COVID by the state. I'd like to know what that amount is. And then one of my big takeaways from this, and I just had a text conversation with Mia Kate at Bannock County Development, and our property taxes are, from her perspective, they are an impacting factor on our capacity for really strong economic development. So obviously for me, I believe economic development needs to be a huge priority. And to that end, Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering if we could really maybe focus some IT on getting our economic development portion of our website, like take Roku off. We've got info from 2002 on there, and it's compared to Twin and IF, when you look at the economic development portion of our website, it does us, I believe, a great disservice. And when I say us, I mean the people of Pocatello. Because between our poverty rate, what we're seeing today, I just think we have to pull out all the stops and really have a proactive approach and a plan for getting economic development to happen. I think that's a big part of our way out of the bind that I see us getting into.
So if I could just respond real quickly to Chris's comments. As it relates to the first item that you commented on, list of department reserves, the presumption is that, if I'm characterizing this incorrectly, let me know, but the presumption is that there's excess money in people's budgets. Is that what you're saying? Or?
All I know is that last year, which is all I really have to go on, and periodically throughout this year at council meetings, there'll be X amount of matches required, or this expenditure is requested and it will be funded out of department reserves. So that suggests to me that there's money there. And so I'm curious to know, and that leads to the question of if, for example, the trend line for a department is that they've been able to each year, or in general, build substantial reserves. And I understand the concept and the intelligence behind having reserves. But if, for example, a department has traditionally been able to accumulate significant reserves, that might also suggest that the budget has been a bit more generous than it needed to be on an annual basis.
Okay, so a long.
Jim, I want to clarify real quick. Remember the long you're on.
Yeah, I'll remember it for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you talking about excess reserves over the 25% policy the council has set, or including the 25%?
Is the 25% for the city or per department?
So let me continue on with my long time ago. One of the very first things in one of the very first accounting classes I took was define what surplus is and define what reserve is. It means something it's in the eyes of the beholder. It's a non-technical term. It technically, from an accounting perspective, there is no reserve for any particular department. They don't have a reserve. The only place there is a reserve is on the balance sheet. And I can tell you, and I say this emphatically and with great exuberance, the fire department does not have any part of the general fund reserve. They get none of that. I'm being a little bit facetious. I'm sure he's agreeing with me right now. Police department, on the other hand, maybe I'll give them a little bit more, maybe not. None of the departments have anything. They don't have dibs on any part of the general fund balance and reserve. What they might have, and this is part of the discussion I've had with each one of the department heads, is when you give me a budget slide that says you have a variance in your personnel category and in your materials and services category, I want you to explain it, because that's what the city council wants to see when it's explained. If you're going to see no variance between your current year's budget and your next year's budget, there might be a question along the lines of, so CPI has gone up by 1.18%. We don't see any increase in your materials and services line items. How are you able to absorb that? Well, that might be what you're asking as it relates to reserves. Is there any reserve capacity in budgets? I think again, that's probably within the context of from a public policy perspective. Each one of the departments, I've talked to every single one of them, and they did a very good job of trying to be as diligent as they possibly could in preparing their budgets. I know they did. If you tell them you have to be more diligent, you have to come up with some more money, they'll probably find a way to do it. Some of them are going to have an easier time doing it than others. I happen to think in my department, for instance, there's really only one way that I'm going to be able to reduce my budget, and it has to do with humans. And there's not any additional money in my budget. Truly, we don't do much in the way of anything else other than what you see right now is a good portion of the budget and the people that are there. So when you say, is there reserve in the budgets? It's a little bit of a term of art. There's not a whole lot of science there, but if you give us a goal, you say that that's what you'd like us to work towards, then the mayor and I will see how we can work that out. But in the case of the police department, we just got a grant that allowed for us to hire additional officers. We can't, by the terms of that grant, we cannot reduce personnel. I mean, we'd have to give all that money back to the federal government and then unhire those that we hired. A mess, real big mess. Anyhow.
So what does it mean when we see in an agenda item that the match is X and it will be paid for by department reserves? What does that mean?
I don't think it has anything to do with what would be considered, they've got more money in their budget than what maybe they should have budgeted. But I believe what they're saying is they're going to make some adjustments that allows for that to be absorbed within their budget.
What I understood from Ashley, and maybe I misunderstood, but I thought I understood.
I can't take any credit for that.
No,
So, yeah.
but I guess I'm asking, I thought I understood that there was somehow that departments, there was a way to keep track of unexpended money or unearmarked money that was tied to specific departments, because I've heard language around that over and over
I hope
again.
none of the granting agencies are listening to what I'm going to say right now.
I don't understand what it means.
But each department goes through a process. They look at ways to associate things that they're already doing with
Right.
the match requirement. If they can't do that, then they have to find some way to say that particular item that I bought is a matching item to deal with this grant that I got. So that item that I bought, if I had no other place to do other than just that line item, I'd have to find a way to absorb that within my budget.
So maybe we need a more accurate, in those agenda items, when it says the police department's going to match this with $60,000. I guess I'd like to know, where's that $60,000 coming from? Like, what are they not going to do that frees up that $60,000, or where is it coming from?
So
I
most
think what
of,
you're saying is though that may come from another grant for something else.
Well, there is some creativity associated with how you prove to the granting agency that you're using something that you already got in your budget and allocated it. And again, I hope the granting agencies, I mean, they know that this is how this works, but essentially you're being creative. You're trying to say that a portion of what we already are doing can be qualified for matching purposes. That's different than saying, well, we really can't say any part of our current expenditure budget is qualifying, so we're going to have to absorb it somehow within our budget. And that goes to your point, which is, so if you have excess monies in your budget, that's allowing you to be able to absorb that. You need to be able to say what the impact on your budget is within that context.
so most of the time, when you see something that we are on an agenda that says will be paid for by, or is budgeted in Parks Department budgets, is because we've already budgeted that.
It says reserves.
No, not very often. Very seldom does it say reserves. And if it does say reserves, and most of the grants, most of the granting opportunities and stuff, they allow for in-kind stuff. And so that's where most of that comes from. And very seldom do we see used through reserves. We do see it at times because we do know that there is some reserves, or they will find it within their budget, or the reserves that we're talking about is coming out of the general fund. But most of the time, those projects, those items that they're purchasing are already budgeted for and have been budgeted for within the budget.
So just
Not
so,
always,
yeah.
but
and
most of the time.
Just so Chris knows, when I go through and I look at agenda items, that's the kind of thing that I look for. I really do. I'm always interested to know when somebody says that they're going to be able to absorb it in their budget, how are they going to be able to do that? And I have to say, I'm working at it right now, and that's part of the interaction that I have with the department heads. But I think the message is pretty clear. You would like to know that, where's that money coming from? And that's my interest as well. And I ask any one of the department heads that I've asked that question to, I need to know where it's at in your budget, because that is going to be a question that gets asked by the city council.
So,
Chris?
and Josh, if you're listening at the animal shelter, I'm not trying to put Josh on the, in the crosshairs at all, but because I'm on the Friends of the Animal Shelter Board, and we're talking about, funding a dog park and so forth and so on, this language has come up, relative to that and some other projects that the Friends are planning to contribute to significantly. Well, our department has some reserves. And so that's why I'm confused, because it's not like I just made up this phrase. I actually hear it on a regular basis. I just don't understand.
Okay.
There's reserves and excess reserves. We hear both of those.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I say I don't even know that I have all the right language.
I'd
around
love to
this.
hear the difference between what excess reserve means
Yeah.
and reserve. I think reserve by definition is above and beyond. So I think, again, I can't take credit for things that I haven't actually heard, but I believe, based on some of the things I have heard, is that there is a sense that monies that were transferred out of people's budgets and moved into Fund 78 would qualify as a reserve. That is money that's in a different fund that's designed or was designed to be for capital type projects. That's probably not the best way to say that, and I'll help Josh to understand that. And I hope all the rest of the departments are listening to this as well, because I understand where you're coming from. I really do.
So it sounds like some of the terminology has been different. I went and looked through the agenda for tonight, and for example, let's see, per month are available in police department fiscal year 2021 budget.
Right.
And then you have another one.
And I'd love to know,
for-
because we're not going to do blah, blah, blah.
But that was already planned, those things would have been already planned for, and we're now executing those. Anything excess of that is, I think, what you're talking about.
Well, or I would just like to know if the police department has 60 grand or 5 grand or whatever it is, because we knew this was coming and we budgeted for it, because we're not going to do this. That's,
But that's what
because.
that's saying,
I
when
think-
it says
I think
that it's
that's-
in
yeah.
the 2021
No,
budget,
no.
it means we budgeted for
No, it means that
And
it's,
they budgeted
it
for it.
is, they have that money, they can find that money within the budget pot for this year, but it doesn't mean that it was necessarily budgeted a year ago now.
To me, that is what that means.
Well, I would just like it spelled out, let me just speak for myself. I would just like it spelled out, and we have that money because we knew this was coming and we put it in the budget, or because we're not going to do X, Y, Z.
And I think that Jim is working on
Right.
getting that straightened
Right,
around and
but I
stuff,
just
so I
want to
think that's
clarify that,
what's happening.
Thank you.
Okay, Roger.
I'm taking a stab at this without anything in front of me. But I think one of the things that we try to do as a city, we try to have every department manage for a 25% reserve, operational reserve, so that if something dire happened, they could operate for 3 months. And so I think the target is for 3-month reserve for each department, and we call it generate a surplus that lets them operate, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes, and we try to put into that with some regularity, because there are some departments that are way below that, and some are way above it. And we have, at one point, we established a policy because some were generating way over what they should, and we said no more than 25%. I do think that there has been an operational what's missing, so to speak, where you could, with as long as you didn't go over your budget, you could transfer line item stuff around within your general budget. And I think that's how some of it is achieved, is that they change their priorities after it's been budgeted to, we'll do this instead of this.
I think that's what Chris is asking for, an accounting on that.
And I also think that, I'm just going to stab in the air, that there are times when we go a long time filling a position and we generate lots of funds because those positions, say if we're down 3 firefighters, and we're down 6 months for 3 firefighters, there's 6 months of salary that has been generated there, and sometimes that's been used to offset something else that was felt as a dire need.
That's where most of that 25% has been built, though, is on.
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was in one of the cities that I worked for, we actually put in the budget, it was a credit against all the rest of the expenditure accounts, but particularly in the payroll line items, is what we called planned vacancy, and an amount that was associated with planned vacancies. So when a firefighter or a police officer left the city for whatever reason, and we knew what the history was, we could pretty much determine that there was going to be a vacancy for a period of time, whether we like it or not. It takes a while to fill those positions. So we estimated how much that was going to be for each department, and we put that into the budget. That was a way for us to balance our budget out. We looked at it throughout the year to see whether, hey, we're not meeting our goal there. So that means that if you have a vacancy, you're going to need to have, if you're not meeting your goal, you're going to have to leave that position open longer than what typically would be the case in order to meet your goal for planned vacancies. That's one way to deal with it. The 25% reserve, again, we're kind of getting into an area where it gets confusing, but we really don't have many departments in the general fund in particular that are generating money, except for the building department. They're actually generating more money than what they're spending. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing, because essentially what you're doing is you're generating revenue from one source and you're using it for another. I don't believe that's necessarily the best way to do that. I would even suggest that that part of our activity needs to be moved to a different fund so that it balances within that fund. And then the issue that you raise, Roger, which is if they're generating more than 25% above what their expenditures are, then we have to look at, well, how much are we charging fees? What should we do on fees? We're kind of dealing with the same question, but it's on a citywide basis as it relates to property taxes.
Well, and, just as a follow-up, I've been around the council and budgeting for quite a while. I know that at one time, the target of developing budgets, and I might get these backwards, but I believe we tried to budget 1% long and spend 2% less, so there'd be about 3% differential. And that was the cushion in operational funding, so that we didn't get a lot of surprises by it. Budget a little bit long, spend a little bit short, and then there would be, maybe that is where the reserves generated in part.
That's conservative budgeting, and that's a good practice, and that'll keep a fund balance in a good position for a long time on that basis.
Chris?
Don't call on me, I just totally forgot. Oh, I know, I'm sorry, if I may. don't laugh at me, Mr. Cheatham. Or Mr. Bray. I want to put the shoe on the other foot to a degree now because, having run a building in a district where if I could manage to create efficiencies and still meet my performance benchmarks, I was allowed to somehow or other accumulate money so that I could do a big literacy project, I could, et cetera. And then having functioned in a district where, by creating efficiencies, I'm human, there was no tangible return to my students. And having experienced, being on both sides of that situation, I do know that, and believe in rewarding entities, in this case, in the city's case, departments, for being, for searching for every efficiency and I think it's okay, and I think it's actually advisable because it gets better results if that department is then able to somehow reap a reward from their own diligence. So I don't want to be heard that it's like, departments are supposed to be reaping every efficiency and then, and they accrue no benefit other than the soulful feeling that they have functioned on a higher plane. So I don't want departments to hear. I mean, I do hope that there's a way we can come up with something that follows accounting principles and also somehow allows, encourages departments to create savings when possible.
Okay. With that, any other final things? I'm not seeing any. Council, thank you. I think we have an idea of what you're interested in, and I think that you also have an idea of some of the challenges that we're going to come up having. So we appreciate you're working on that. We are going to adjourn this meeting, but I do want to make the announcement that immediately following this meeting, we do have a special city council meeting. And so with that, we are adjourned. Doesn't mean the council gets to go anywhere, it just means that